Ladies and gentlemen, there is a silent epidemic sweeping across generations, not a virus of the body, but of the soul. It begins subtly, in the repetition of unfulfilling routines, in the dulling of passions, in the quiet moments when you ask yourself, "Is this all there is?" This epidemic is a wasted life, not because we lack time, but because we fail to live authentically. But you can stop this. You can return to yourself, to what truly matters. Today, I offer you 5 key principles, not rules but inner awakenings, to help you stop wasting your life and begin living it fully. There is within each of us a silent, often unacknowledged figure, a presence that watches, waits, and occasionally whispers when the world goes quiet. It is the self we might have been, the roads not taken, the voices we hushed for the sake of survival. This presence is not a ghost but a living force, buried under years of compliance, repression, and distraction. It is the shadow, the unlived life within. To face the shadow is not an act of indulgence. It is an act of necessity, for the soul that ignores this inner force does not simply remain still, it calcifies. It surrenders its vitality to the comfort of habit, the narcotic of conformity. We become echoes of ourselves, inhabiting routines that may offer security but deny significance. In this denial lies a deep spiritual fatigue. We find ourselves staring at ceilings late at night, not because we are restless, but because something essential within us has grown silent, and in that silence there is grief. We often believe we are rational creatures, making choices grounded in logic and pragmatism. But beneath those choices lie fears, subtle and persistent, that steer us away from the unfamiliar terrain of our deeper longing. The shadow contains those longings. It houses the passions we discarded, the instincts we suppressed, the anger we disowned, the tenderness we were taught to hide. And though we may banish these parts from the light of day, they do not disappear. They manifest instead in our symptoms, in anxiety, in depression, in addiction, in apathy. Not because we are broken, but because we are incomplete. Consider the story of Mark. For 2 decades he lived a life that others would label successful. Steady paycheck, respectable title, polished shoes. And yet a moment arrived unannounced when the illusion collapsed. In the safety of his own car, away from the expectations of coworkers and clients, he was overtaken by panic, not born of immediate danger, but from an unbearable void. The moment was not a breakdown, it was a reckoning. Something ancient stirred in him, not a solution, but a memory, of sketching as a boy, of becoming lost in color and line, of feeling, if only briefly, fully alive. That memory was a message from the shadow. It reminded him of who he might have been, and who he still could become. To engage with the shadow is to begin an honest dialogue with the self. It requires courage, not the flamboyant courage of heroism, but the quiet courage of turning inward. It means asking dangerous questions. Where have I betrayed myself? What parts of me have I banished for the approval of others? What would I create if I were not afraid of being judged? These questions wound, but they also awaken. They tear through the numbing layers of our daily persona and expose a truer, wilder self beneath. And yet, many resist. They fear that the shadow will destroy them, but this fear is misplaced. The shadow is not the enemy. It is the keeper of your vitality. It does not want to punish you. It wants to complete you. It does not seek chaos. It seeks wholeness. When we approach it with reverence instead of resistance, we find that its darkness is not void but fertility. Within it lies the energy to transform, to create, to love more fiercely, to live more truthfully. The tragedy of the modern condition is not that people suffer. Suffering is universal. The tragedy is that they suffer for nothing. They endure pain without meaning because they have forgotten their deeper calling. They trade the sacred for the safe, passion for predictability, wonder for convenience, and in doing so, They exile the parts of themselves that were meant to sing. The shadow does not disappear in this exile. It waits. It whispers through the dreams that unsettle us, through the art that stirs us, through the envy we feel toward those who dared to leap. It is there in every pang of jealousy, in every unexplained tear, in every Sunday evening dread that signals a week lived without soul. But here lies the miracle. It is never too late to turn back. The shadow does not age. The unlived life waits for no permission, no perfect moment. It waits only for your attention, and when you give it that, when you truly look at what you abandoned, you begin to reclaim yourself. The sketchpad, the novel, the violin, the mountains, the conversations you never had, the love you never expressed, they are not lost. They are simply hidden, and they are waiting for your return. To confront the shadow is not a solitary act. It reverberates through generations. When you reclaim what you buried, you give others the courage to do the same. You stop perpetuating the myth that adulthood must mean resignation, that maturity requires emotional numbness, that dreams are the domain of the young. You become instead a living invitation, a testimony that authenticity is not a luxury but a responsibility. This is the work of the soul, not to become perfect, but to become whole, to embrace contradiction, to welcome back the outlawed parts of yourself and make them allies, to walk with your fear instead of around it, to speak even when your voice trembles, to risk embarrassment, failure, and disappointment for the sake of something more precious, aliveness. If you do not face your shadow, you will become its puppet. You will find yourself sabotaging joy, fleeing from intimacy, grinding through decades without knowing why. But if you turn toward it, if you listen, you will discover not a demon but a guide, a source of energy you thought you had lost, a wisdom born not of books but of scars. This is the journey you were meant to take, not outward toward achievement, but inward toward integration. The world does not need more efficient workers, more polished personas, more obedient followers. It needs human beings who are awake, who are willing to feel, who are brave enough to descend into themselves and return with fire. Ask yourself, as Mark did in the stillness of that parking lot, what have I forsaken in the name of safety? What would it mean to choose aliveness over approval? The answers will not come quickly, but if you are patient, if you are willing to let silence become your teacher, you will hear them, and when you do, you will find not a path already paved, but one waiting to be forged. The unlived life is not a burden. It is an invitation, and the shadow is not a curse. It is a calling. The only question that remains is whether you will answer. There comes a moment in the quiet recesses of the soul when a voice stirs, faint yet persistent. It calls not to the shallow desires of comfort, nor to the fleeting pleasures that distract and numb. It is the voice of responsibility, ancient and enduring, summoning us to rise above the inertia that binds so many to a life of quiet despair. Too often, the modern individual, overwhelmed by the clamor of trivial obligations and digital illusions, seeks solace in distraction, and in doing so, unknowingly drifts farther from what truly matters. Not with a cry, but with a whisper, life passes, unclaimed, unlived. The enemy of greatness is not always malevolence, but mediocrity, an invisible chain forged from good intentions never acted upon. It is easy, so very easy, to choose the couch over the call to adventure, to postpone the painful conversation, to dismiss the deeper longing with the rational excuse of not now. But in these small refusals the soul pays a great price. Each abdication of responsibility chips away at the scaffolding of the self, until one day the mirror no longer reflects a person, but a shadow, a fragment of who they might have been. Responsibility is not the weight we fear it to be. It is the spine of the soul, the structure that allows one to stand upright in the face of chaos. It asks not for perfection, but for presence. It does not demand grandiose action, but authenticity. When one embraces responsibility, even in its smallest forms, one enters into alignment with the truth of their being. A man who tends to his health not out of vanity, but because he values life itself, a woman who mends a broken relationship not for ease, but for integrity, these are not mundane acts, they are acts of inner revolution. The seduction of comfort whispers lies to the psyche. It tells us that ease is happiness, that peace is the absence of struggle, that silence is the same as serenity. But this is a siren song, and many have dashed their potential against its rocks. True peace is not found in escaping struggle, but in meeting it with purpose. The individual who takes up their responsibility discovers a reservoir of strength they did not know they had. In choosing to engage with life fully, even painfully, they access the fullness of their humanity. When we evade responsibility, we do not merely delay action. We betray ourselves. Something inside withers when we know what must be done and yet do not do it. A man can live in a mansion, surrounded by the trappings of success, and yet be empty within, because he has abandoned the deeper responsibilities that give life weight and wonder. There is no path to self-respect that bypasses responsibility. To carry the load that is yours, to act when it is inconvenient, to speak when silence would serve you better. These are the marks of an integrated soul. The question is not whether you will suffer in life, but what you will suffer for. To avoid responsibility is not to avoid suffering. It is merely to suffer meaninglessly. But when suffering is tied to something greater, to the love of a child, the fulfillment of a calling, the defense of a principle, it is transfigured. In such suffering, the soul finds its shape. As the metal is purified by fire, so too is the self refined through the furnace of responsibility. Even in the deepest darkness, the presence of responsibility can light the way. Viktor Frankl bore witness to this truth in the most harrowing of circumstances. In the abyss of Auschwitz, where death and dehumanization were daily fare, he observed that those who could cling to a deeper purpose, who had a reason to live beyond the horror, were the ones most likely to endure. They were not spared pain, but they were anchored in meaning. Their suffering did not crush them because it had context. In their responsibility to others, to memories, to ideals, they found a reason to keep breathing. It is easy to think that one must do something grand to matter, but the path of responsibility begins in the humble, often invisible choices of the day, to choose health when indulgence beckons, to choose honesty when a lie would be easier. To make the call, write the letter, step into the difficult room. These are not small acts. They are the bricks from which the cathedral of a meaningful life is built. Ask yourself, where have you run from the work that is yours alone to do? Where have you traded the discomfort of growth for the illusion of safety? In what ways have you silenced the call of your deeper nature to avoid the anxiety of change? These questions are not accusations, but invitations to reclaim your life from the clutches of inertia. Each of us is born with a latent nobility, but it does not emerge without effort. Responsibility is the crucible through which potential becomes character. It is the proving ground of the soul. When you say yes to what matters, even trembling, even unsure, you activate something eternal within you. The universe responds not to comfort seekers, but to those who dare to take up the burden of their existence with courage and reverence. The journey will not be easy. You will falter, you will be tempted, you will question whether it is worth it. But in the end, the only regret will be not that you carried too much, but that you carried too little. The soul, like the body, grows through resistance. Responsibility is the sacred weight that shapes us into who we are meant to become. Comfort will always be there, waiting to lull you back to sleep. But you were not made to sleep. You were made to awaken, to rise, to bear the weight of meaning. Step into the arena, take up the load, Say yes to what matters, and in doing so, you will find not only who you are, but who you have always been. There comes a time in every person's life when the air grows too tight around them, when the walls of their identity, painstakingly built from the bricks of other people's desires, begin to press inward. It starts subtly, a restlessness that haunts the quiet hours, a gnawing discontent that cannot be named. But in time it becomes unbearable, for what the world calls a successful life often comes at the cost of one's soul. To live by a script written by another is to betray the inner self, the one that has whispered to us since childhood in dreams, in longings, in quiet rebellion. From our earliest years, we are handed scripts, by well-meaning parents who want the best for us, by cultures that value achievement over authenticity, by systems that reward obedience over originality. These scripts promise security, applause, and belonging, but they exact a hidden toll. The individual who follows them without question becomes like a beautiful house built on sand, elegant, admired, but slowly sinking into something unseen. The soul, that ancient and inward being, does not communicate in the language of checklists or promotions. It speaks in symbols, in dreams, in strange yearnings that defy logic. It is the pull towards something inexplicable, the ache for meaning in a world obsessed with measurement. When ignored, the soul does not scream, it withdraws, it becomes quiet, and the life that once seemed full begins to lose its color. Consider the story of Emma. At 29, she had reached what many would call the pinnacle of early success. Her life was curated, polished, a perfect photo, a pristine resume, but beneath the surface she was unraveling. The accolades rang hollow. The city lights that once dazzled her now felt like a prison of endless expectations. One night, breaking under the weight of a life she never truly chose, she admitted to a friend, "I'm living someone else's dream." That moment of honesty was the beginning of her liberation. She left behind the high-rise office, the relentless pace, the applause of strangers. She became a teacher in a rural village, surrounded not by prestige, but by peace, and in the stillness of that new life she found herself. For the first time, she said, "I sleep in peace." Emma's journey is not rare, but it is rarely spoken of. Many walk through life asleep, animated not by their own passions, but by the borrowed ambitions of others. They rise each morning not with a sense of purpose, but out of obligation. They climb ladders built against the wrong walls. And when they reach the top, they find not fulfillment, but a haunting emptiness. The world, with all its structures and institutions, will eagerly hand you scripts. It will tell you what a good life looks like. It will praise you for conforming. It will punish you for deviating. But to follow these scripts unquestioningly is to abandon your own inner compass. And what is a life without that compass? It is a drifting, a wandering, a forgetting of one's true face. There is a deep courage required to tear up those scripts. It is not a reckless act, but a sacred one. To write your own script is not to chase every impulse or fantasy. It is to listen with reverence to the deep voice within that says, "This is who I am." That voice is not always loud. Often it is barely audible beneath the noise of the world, but it is insistent, and once you truly hear it, you can never go back. It may terrify you. It may ask you to leave comfort behind. It may ask you to disappoint those who love you, to walk alone for a while, to face ridicule or failure. But in that terrifying space lies your truest life, for we are not here to mimic others, to fit neatly into mold. We are here to become, each in our own way, each with our own calling. The tragedy is not in falling. The tragedy is in never daring to rise in your own direction. A life spent climbing the wrong ladder, no matter how high you go, is still a wasted life. You may gain the world and yet lose yourself. You may be celebrated and yet feel invisible. You may be productive and yet feel purposeless. But there is another path. It is the path of the inner journey, the slow unfolding of the self. It begins with a question: what feels most alive to me? Not what feels safe, not what feels acceptable, but what stirs the soul, what awakens the ancient fire within. The answer may not come immediately. It may come in dreams, in quiet urges, in moments of inexplicable emotion. Follow them. Follow the aliveness, even if it leads you into the unknown. You are not here to play a role in someone else's story. You are here to write your own. Not everyone will understand. That is not your burden. Your task is to be loyal to your own truth, to live in such a way that when you meet your reflection, you see not a stranger, but someone real. There is no greater sorrow than to reach the end of life and realize you never truly lived, and no greater joy than to walk each day in alignment with who you are. So listen, not to the noise of the crowd, but to the quiet call of your own soul. In that call is your path. In that path is your life. And in your life, lived truly, lies the spark that can light the world. When we speak of reconnecting with the sacred, we are not merely suggesting a ritual or routine. We are pointing towards something far deeper, an intimate homecoming, a re-encounter with the numinous dimension of existence that dwells beneath the noise of modern life. It is the silent whisper that calls to us in moments of solitude, in tears we cannot explain, in the stirring of our hearts when beauty overtakes us. The sacred does not need to wear the garments of religion, nor demand dogma or temple. It is that which renders us still and evokes reverence without command. We are, in the truest sense, spiritual beings, each of us vessels of a vast inner world that longs for meaning beyond the material. To deny this dimension is to live fragmented, suspended in a state of exile from ourselves. And in that exile, we seek comfort not in truth, but in anesthesia, distractions that numb rather than nourish, addictions that chain rather than free. A life estranged from the sacred quickly becomes a life of performance, a dance on the surface, rehearsed, efficient, and hollow, but the sacred waits. It does not clamor for attention, it does not scream. It waits in stillness, in the hush between breaths, in the ache of longing. It reveals itself when we slow down enough to truly feel to be pierced by the gravity of our own existence. In the pre-dawn light of a silent walk, we may begin to remember what we had forgotten, that we are not machines, that our lives are not spreadsheets, that behind the veil of utility and outcome lies something eternal, tender, feral, and unmeasured. To reconnect with the sacred is to reclaim our original face. It is to look into the eyes of a dying friend and witness not only their final breath, but the infinite tapestry of love, fear, joy, and sorrow that brought them to that moment. In that gaze, time dissolves. We are no longer concerned with the petty urgencies of our to-do lists. We are brought face to face with the soul. Why do we forget? Perhaps because remembering hurts. There is a quiet agony in realizing how long we have been asleep. But there is also redemption. We can begin again. We can sit with our dreams and listen, not analyze, not judge, but listen, as though they were sacred letters sent from a part of us that still remembers the forest paths, the starlit nights, the language of birds and bones. Our dreams do not lie to us. They whisper truths too wild for the daylight hours. Music, too, has the power to summon us back, not the music we consume as background noise, but the kind that shatters our armor. The kind that reaches into our chest and squeezes, reminding us that we are alive, and that being alive is both terrible and beautiful. In those moments we may weep, not out of despair, but because we have touched something real. And what is more sacred than that? To be real, to be undone, to be present. We spend so much of our lives escaping presence, fearing silence, avoiding depth. But the sacred demands that we descend, that we risk the unknown terrain of ourselves, that we stop pretending to know and begin to feel, to kneel, not in subjugation, but in reverence for the mystery of being. This is not about ease. Spiritual practice does not make life smooth, it makes it anchored. A tree does not escape the wind, but its roots hold it firm. Those who pray, who meditate, who walk in forests and touch the earth with bare hands, they are not immune to grief, but they grieve with dignity. They suffer with awareness, they love without needing guarantees, and in that they are free. Our world is starving for the sacred. In a culture obsessed with speed, image, and consumption, to live slowly and soulfully is a radical act. It is not passive. It is an act of courage to say, I will not let the algorithms dictate the rhythm of my heart. I will not let convenience determine my truth. I will not forget why I am here. Ask yourself, what anchors you? What draws you back to the marrow of your life when everything else is screaming for your attention? Perhaps it is the sound of rain on your roof. Perhaps it is a line of poetry that has haunted you for years. Perhaps it is the memory of your grandmother's hands or the first time your child looked at you and smiled. These moments are not small. They are sacred. Guard them. Protect them as fiercely as you protect your ambitions. Because without them, the ambitions are empty. A life without the sacred is a house without a foundation. No matter how polished the floors, it will collapse. But when we return to what matters, when we root ourselves in what is eternal, our lives begin to carry a different weight. A soulful weight, a weight that grounds rather than burdens. This is not a call to abandon the world. It is a call to re-enter it more fully, to walk through our days awake, to breathe with intention, to look strangers in the eye and see not roles or rivals, but fellow pilgrims on a path none of us fully understand. The sacred reveals itself when we live in this way, not in distant heavens, but here in the trembling now. We are more than tasks and tweets, more than our metrics, more than our masks. When we dare to remember this, when we step beyond the neon distractions and return to the quiet throb of the soul, we do not become less effective, less modern, less relevant. We become human again, and that, in the end, is what the sacred is trying to teach us. How to be whole in a world that is constantly pulling us apart. The veil that separates life from death is not as thick as we imagine. It is not a wall, but a membrane, thin, translucent, always present. Yet most people move through life as though it were made of stone, impermeable and distant. They speak of death in hushed tones, push it to the back of their minds, as if denial could negate its certainty. But denial does not shield us, it merely numbs us, and in that numbness we lose the pulse of life, for only in recognizing death, not as an end to fear but as a truth to embrace, do we unlock the full weight and wonder of what it means to live. To accept death is not to surrender to despair, but to awaken to urgency. It is to know, deeply and without illusion, that every breath is a gift, unearned and unguaranteed. It is to know that the clock began ticking the moment we were born, and that no one escapes its final chime. And in that knowledge a fire ignites, not of panic, but of presence. When the illusion of permanence falls away, what remains is the raw and vibrant now, trembling with possibility. So many wander through their years as if life were a dress rehearsal for something better, something more worthy, something to begin once the timing is perfect. They delay love until they feel ready. They defer dreams until the risks feel safe. They silence their truths until the world feels receptive. But the stage is already lit. The curtain has already risen. This imperfect, chaotic, beautiful moment is the performance, and every day spent waiting is a day lost to the abyss of what might have been. There is an inscription carved into memory that reads, "He died waiting." It pierces like a shard of ice, not because of its novelty, but because of its universality. How many die with music still locked in their throats, with words of love unspoken, with forgiveness held like a sword raised against themselves? How many leave the world with regrets wrapped around their souls like chains, not because they lack time, but because they lack the courage to see time for what it is, a flame, not a reservoir. To live is to feel. To feel is to risk pain, and pain in its truest form is not the enemy of life. It is the sign that we are alive. Too often we confuse comfort with vitality, and in seeking one, we sacrifice the other. But to truly live is to let the heart break open, to allow both the beauty and the terror in. The sky must darken for the stars to appear. The flower must die for the seed to awaken. There is no ecstasy without vulnerability, no transformation without surrender. If we could peer behind the mask of fear that so often paralyzes us, we would find not a monster but a mirror. It reflects our longing to matter, our desperation to leave some mark, our quiet cry for connection. And yet, in fleeing that fear, we flee the very thing that makes life meaningful. Death reminds us that the story ends, yes, but that it is still being written right now in this very breath, in your next choice. In the way you speak to your child, or answer the phone, or hold your lover's gaze just a moment longer, we must speak what aches to be spoken. Truth, when buried, does not die, it festers. The unsaid becomes the undone. There are words caught in your throat that could shatter chains, rebuild bridges, or spark revolutions, and you will never know what would have happened if you do not say them. There is someone you need to forgive, perhaps even yourself. There is something you must begin, not tomorrow but today, because tomorrow is a phantom. Only this moment is real. We are not here to be safe. We are here to be whole, and wholeness comes not from perfection, but from courage. The courage to begin when we feel unprepared. The courage to love when we fear loss. The courage to change when our habits hold us in place like gravity. The courage to live even though we will die. Let everything happen to you. That is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is to recognize that control is an illusion and that freedom lies in surrender not to fate, but to feeling. Grief, joy, fear, ecstasy, they all pass through us like weather. We are not the storm but the sky, and no feeling is final, no state of being permanent. To resist the flow is to shatter against it. To allow is to be carried, not passively, but purposefully. This is your life. Not the life you hope for one day, not the life you curate on screens or sketch in fantasies. This one, right here, in this flawed body, in this cluttered home, in this season of uncertainty or exhaustion or wonder. This moment is unrepeatable. It is as sacred as any cathedral, as alive as any forest. It will never come again, and you will never be this version of yourself again. You cannot outrun death, but you can outrun regret. You can choose again and again to live in such a way that, when the end comes, as it will, you will not meet it as a stranger. You will greet it as an old friend who has walked beside you all along, not a thief, but a teacher. Not a curse, but a call, so live with intensity, with honesty, with heartache and humor and a flame in your chest that says, I was here, I felt it all. I did not sleepwalk through the miracle of my existence. I dared, I burned, I lived, so I ask you, will you keep drifting, or will you wake up? Stop wasting your life, face your shadow, embrace responsibility, burn the old script, touch the sacred, look death in the eye, and live. The world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs alive people. And the moment you decide to truly live, you become one of them. Thank you.